Welcome to the weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report. My name is Shannon Boucher. I'm coming to you from Ottawa. My co-host Melanie in the Toronto region. We talk every week about all the gender woo in Canada from coast to coast. This week is no different. We're going to talk about some major media coverage of pronoun problems and those sorts of things manifesting in the way that police report statistics. We're going to talk about an offer of free candy for children in British Columbia. A president of a pride organization who was arrested for possession of child pornography and inappropriately touching a minor. There's some stuff going on Vancouver Island. We're gonna segue into. Melanie, what are some of the stories that we're gonna cover?
Well, glad you asked. So there's been a few things going on this week. One of the top things that I would like to go over, that we're going to go over, is the CHEO website put out some interesting recommendations for the gender clinic there. We also have an event coming up with WDI. There's an event going on. There's some goings on with the parents' rights in Saskatchewan, and just a brief mention of a short documentary that has been put out, I believe it was this week, that's been making the rounds that I think would be interesting for everyone to watch. But beyond that, we've had a few more subscribers of late. So thank you very much if you've subscribed to the channel recently. I hope that you're enjoying the content that we're putting out. We don't have a lot of time normally during the week to put it together, but we try to round up some of the news in gender across Canada every week and unpack it a little bit for you. And then lastly, at the end of the episode, as Shannon said, we're going to talk about a more broad cultural issue going on in Canada. So yeah, thank you very much for subscribing. If you are watching and haven't subscribed, please consider liking and subscribing.
And we're going to get a little bit off the gender topic for our deep dive this week and talk about someone we've been following a little bit, a reporter with Rebel News by the name of David Menzies. And it was a hot topic this week across Canada about journalism and the way that people perceive journalists and how journalists conduct themselves, as well as how our political system is treating journalism. So stay tuned for that one. And thank you very much again for subscribing. I'm gonna jump right into the first story here. So our first story, Jamie Sarkanak has been covering the gender issue fairly reasonably and fairly consistently this year, or this past year, and points out something that a lot of people are starting to realize, if they hadn't before, that the issue of appropriate pronouns and addressing people by their proper sex, or addressing them by their pronouns instead of their proper sex, is creating confusion in a whole bunch of ways in our society. And we talked about Laverne Waskahat, let's just try this, a person in Alberta who was known to be a risk to reoffend against children. Now, Laverne Waskahat, our mental impressions are that Laverne would be a woman. And media is reporting either gender-neutral language around these people, or reporting the sex or the pronouns that they identify with and claim to be rather than their sex. Let me read this. Since then, police elsewhere have clamped down. If you go missing in Toronto, Mississauga, or Brampton, police won't report your sex or gender to the public. Missing persons aren't available to self-identify, so how do we know what their gender is? Wouldn't it be proper to gender them, says Sarkanak? The resulting text alerts are DEI compliant, but they're pretty darn useless if a photo isn't available in the name, and the name is unisex or foreign. Omitted from the warning about Waskahat was an indication whether this person was male or female. Police, by adopting gender-neutral language as an inclusive practice, left it to the reader to guess.
Yeah, we're having a problem here because when you put intersectionality, DEI, critical theory, whatever you want to call these things, when you put that above reality, just basic reality, we're kind of starting to have a bit of a problem. Yeah, that was my thoughts when I read this. I think it's really important to bring that to the public's attention as much as possible, that we can be polite. If you have someone who in your life you want to adopt the pronouns that they have, that's up to you. That's my opinion anyway. If you want to do that, it's up to you. But when we're talking about things in the public realm that affect other people, that can become a bit of a problem. So I'm glad that was brought up.
We've become so focused on feelings in our society for some reason that we are afraid to offend the offenders and misgender them for some reason. And then it's the same bizarre philosophy that has led recently to a BC court decision to allow drug addicts and users to shoot up in children's school grounds. And if someone would come along and shoo them away, like a police officer or a social worker, this could be a violation of their human rights because it could stigmatize them.
Well, on the same line, wasn't there the police video this week saying that you can't post videos of thieves, those little cameras on your door. You can't post those videos
pirates.
of people stealing stuff because that's violating their rights.
Their rights to privacy. Unbelievable. No edict from a police force is going to stop me from posting the picture of someone trying to break into my Jeep or taking stuff off my porch. Sorry.
Yeah. So my view of a liberal. So I still consider myself to be a liberal person. Absolutely. And my philosophy on being liberal is I am okay with people, adults, let's be clear, adults determining their lives, what they wish to do, how they want to interact in the community, so on and so forth. You can live your life as you please, but there's a limit. And that limit is if what you're doing is harming others, then there's a bit of a problem and we need to put boundaries around that. And in this case, what a lot of this wokeism, frankly, I'll just call it that, is doing is that it's starting to impede on other people, whether it's males and female prisons, where it's protecting the offenders, protecting the porch pirates, whatever you want to call it. When we start impeding on other people's liberties, we're having a bit of a problem. That's not liberal at all. That's something entirely different.
Indeed. Jumping now to our next story.
It came out this week that the former president of Canadian LGBTQ Pride organization has been charged with child abuse, child sexual exploitation, and the possession of and distribution of child abuse material. We point out on this show we have pointed out on this show several times that there are ways of knowing, ways of being within the Pride community, if you want to call it that, that seek to undermine boundaries with young people. And we keep pointing out that when you take away some of those guardrails, you're encouraging people who may have ulterior motives and not necessarily the nicest kind of ulterior motives with young people to get involved. And so this is another example of that happening this week. Now, I just want to point out as well that there could be child predators in all kinds of communities. They don't have to be part of the LGBTQ community. I'm not trying to point out here that if you're part of the LGBT community, you're a predator. But we keep seeing these examples over and over again of that happening within these communities, particularly the queer community. This is really where it's happening. It's the idea of undoing normativity, right? Mm-hmm. With that comes some risk. I don't know if you have thoughts on that, Shannon.
Well, yeah, I have all kinds of thoughts. Earlier this week, contact that I have from Vancouver Island, Scotty Guy, was his pseudonym. We know him as Scott Geeler. He reported to me about the one of the perps in the Nanaimo Aquatic Center change room who was trying to peep on young girls. And Scotty posted a number of kind of activity playbills for the queer community on Vancouver Island. And there was probably 4 of them. I'm hoping that before we publish, I'm going to be able to put images of those. And these were queer activity events and queer organization events for people from the ages of 14 to 25, from 12 to 18, from, they posted the age categories in here. And I noted that, well, I mean, we've got an overlap between children and adults, for one thing, in the context of sexual identity and queerness. And it seems to be pushing a little far to blend those things and to be, first of all, to be
I think we
advertising to
call that
kids
force teaming. That's
underage,
something I've come across.
under 18 children, to be advertised as part of an activity event to do with sexuality, sexual identity, and sexual attraction. I'm sorry, I just don't think that advertising this kind of thing and hosting these kinds of events is appropriate. Now, this guy in BC was the head of his local pride organization. I just want to put this in context. Fort St. John is, the article says, about 800 kilometers north of Vancouver. They got the wrong city there. Fort St. John's a bit farther north. It's about 1,000 kilometers, 900, 950, that distance. And Fort St. John is a small community. So I can't imagine this guy's having a very good time in the logging industry towns and mining industry areas that he lives in at the moment, because even if there's a pride organization, at this moment he has a target on his back, and he should. Here's more to that sentiment. Okay, this is Drea Humphreys from Rebel News, and I really like the work that Drea's been doing in the last year. She's been all over this issue, and here we have a playbill, again, an activity poster that says, "Do you like candy?" This is terrifying to me that we're seeing this kind of thing. I mean, when I was younger, we had information films and presenters in school warning children about the tactics of predators who would seek to isolate them, kidnap them, take them off the street, entice them. "I've lost my puppy. Can you help me? Do you like candy? Would you like to come and pet my puppy in my van?"
What you're saying, Shannon, is that adults, okay, so we used to be taught that if there's an adult who's offering you candy to talk about sex, that was a predator and you should avoid that stranger because stranger danger. And
Indeed.
now we have people putting out posters unironically saying, "Do you want candy? Come to my little session here to talk about sexuality." And we're not seeing a problem with that. So this is kind of, this is what we'd like to point out.
Well, not
is
only
that
are we not seeing a problem, Melanie, when we raise questions, or when people of good conscience raise questions about this kind of thing in schools or in community groups, we get told that we're bigoted, that we're phobic, that we're anti-gay.
What I got accused this week also is that I was we get accused of this all the time, but I'm focusing on genitals, and I'm the one who's obsessed with sexuality. That's one that comes out quite a bit.
The first time I got that, I was kind of shocked. Like, first of all, nowhere did I say anything about genitals. But this gets thrown, and they reverse the. I think we've talked about the term before, DARVO. It stands for deny, accuse, deny attack, and then reverse victim and offender order, DARVO. And, Carl Jung, the psychologist, would call it the projection of shadow, or projection of one's own negative or scary dark side onto other people. And that's one of the things that we get fairly consistently, and it is shocking, and it's really running out of steam. I'm not seeing it very much anymore compared to what I used to when I first stepped into the public discourse around this.
Now let's move on and talk about Ottawa's gender clinic was it CHEO? The Ottawa Hospital has just opened, or now they're accepting patients for their gender affirming surgery program.
This was shared out by none other than Jordan Peterson. When I checked, he has 4.9 million followers. He picked it up a couple days after the announcement. Now, my daughter was born at the Ottawa Hospital, at the Civic, on this campus. And now they've opened up this new gender affirming surgery program, and it's unique. There are very few of them in Canada like this. So they're able to do some of the elective stuff, the facial feminization or masculinization surgeries, the breast augmentation, either double mastectomies or chest contouring or breast implants, and also to be able to do bottom surgery. That's fairly unique in the Canadian landscape. There is a clinic in Montreal that's doing it, and I believe there's one in Toronto. But they're hard to come by, and the claim of the trans activists is that this is life threatening, that there isn't access to this kind of care that they demand. And so now we have a hospital here locally in Ottawa that has hung up their shingle and that they're going to do these types of surgeries. Now, I have two observations to make. One has to do with the cost of this care and who pays for it. And the other has to do with some comments I heard in one of the back channels that we participate in from a medical doctor who knows some of the systems at work here. The cost, I wrote about this last year. A lot of this costing is covered by OHIP. That's our publicly funded medical system. And so the basic surgeries, like the top surgery, is covered under OHIP. But the chest contouring and masculinization is not. Similarly to breast implants. Breast implants, in terms of a medical necessity, if I'm going to kind of draw the line where I think it might be, it is likely to be, is that if a woman loses a breast to cancer, then a breast augmentation would be part, and reconstruction would be a part of the dealing with cancer and would be more likely to be covered. But if someone's having breast implants for cosmetic reasons, not covered. Now, last year, the federal government, our friend Justin Trudeau, with his $600 billion free-for-all in spending, added a clause extending an additional $75,000 of group benefits coverage for federal employees who identify as transgender to top up and cover costs of sex change surgeries. And I don't believe it's a coincidence that here in Ottawa, where we have a large population of federal public service employees, where this is so many people are going to be covered by this, that these elective surgery clinics providing these breast augmentations, facial feminization. So that means like jaw contouring, so a man's jaw doesn't appear to be so dramatic in its lines, the Adam's apple to be shaved to make that more feminine in appearance. The second thing that I'm going to observe, and again, I mentioned this from a back channel chatter, a medical doctor who works in Eastern Ontario said, this is a public hospital as opposed to the private SRS clinic in Montreal, sex reassignment surgery, SRS. This means there is public accountability. There is a surgical complication database that Ottawa Hospital has participated in. It's called NSQIP. The database logs all short-term and long-term complications. This is really good news. If someone on the inside can push to ensure compliance with the complication monitoring, that rigorous data can become public. Also, as a public hospital, there should be reporting on time utilization. If these cases are done during elective time, there has been something else like that was reduced to make room for those. So if there's a trade-off in the hospital, I think is what it's saying, there has surely been... Oh, I've lost the plot there.
Don't wait. Stop. Pause. Stop taking the slides away. Like you keep taking them down. Don't do that.
Okay. So I'm going to start this bit again.
Yep.
Now, there's a comment I got in the back channels from a medical doctor who works in Eastern Ontario about this clinic and about some of its public funding. And I'm not going to go into the full comment that they shared. This is a public hospital as opposed to the private SRS clinic in Montreal. SRS stands for Sexual Reassignment Surgery. This means there's public accountability. There is a surgical complication database that the Ottawa Hospital has participated in. It's called NSQIP. This database logs all short-term and long-term complications. And as we know, sexual reassignment surgery, especially bottom surgery, has an incredibly high rate of complications for the penile construction, or what do they call the
Phalloplasty?
Phalloplasty, thank you. Removing flesh and skin and tissue from a forearm and creating a fake penis has incredible complications. And I've read different numbers on the vaginoplasty where there's complication rates in the 60% range. So more than half of people. Now, we all know that the data is very poor in these areas. So, take that with a grain of salt. But this is actually good news, because there's a way to force accountability on this clinic and get transparency on the kinds of complications that are coming out of sex reassignment surgery.
I'm going to make a prediction, because you often hear from those surgeons or people who are defending these kinds of surgeries that complication rates exist. They're common throughout all surgeries. Regret rates exist. They're common throughout all surgeries, and that we have to expect a certain amount of regret and complication, and that we should not do it on that basis because it saves lives. However, I'm not sure we have robust data on that, like you said. So this could be good news, because it's not so much about the activists saying, we have to do this, people are going to kill themselves, so we have to accept a certain amount of complication or regret. But the public itself, if they're paying into a system that is creating a situation where you have a lot of regret and complication rate with people with issues throughout their lives, then that might help turn the tide. So yeah, could be good news.
Yeah. I go back to Jordan Peterson's comment here, butchers and liars.
Succinct.
Well, he did a big video. It was short, but it was profound about this issue when he first spoke out about it. And that was the theme of his video, and he was impassioned in his commentary. Speaking of commentary, a lot of what we do here at the Canadian Gender Wars Report is to talk about the way media covers these issues. And this was the first news piece that I got this week, coming from the local CTV News about this clinic. It actually opened up in November, so there was no fanfare, but this was announced by William Eltherington, who is a journalist here in Ottawa. He's obtained his master's degree from the School of Journalism, the J School at Carleton U. That J School has, or at least had, a fantastic reputation for turning out good journalists. And this is a young guy. And I looked at his other academic credentials, studied political science at the University of Victoria. And the longer I'm paying attention to culture war issues and wokeism and DEI and the gender issues in Canada, Victoria seems to be one of the wokest of the woke places in Canada, unfortunately. And UVic has had all kinds. They made news recently for posting job positions for Black candidates only. And not long ago, UBC did the same thing, my alma mater. Very disturbing, but they just have to apply to the Human Rights Commission and say, well, we're underrepresented in Black people, so we're only going to hire Black candidates, as an example of what's going on at UVic. So we can expect that William Eltherington, Esquire III, I don't know, sounds kind of a posh name, is going to be indoctrinated in to the gills here, completely uncritical about it. Was all trans propaganda in his article in CTV.
Moving on, I confused two stories earlier. I confused the Ottawa Hospital with the CHEO Hospital, which is the Children's Hospital in Ottawa. Now, a friend of mine did send me a screenshot this week of something rather interesting, that the CHEO Gender Diversity Clinic, they need referrals. They cannot just, you cannot just walk into the gender diversity clinic as a minor and say, I wish to have gender affirming care. You can't do that. You need a referral. But what do we think referrals are? Normally we think from a doctor, from a psychiatrist, from a psychologist, something like that. No. They point out on their website that they are currently accepting referrals from healthcare professionals, as we'd expect, but they're also accepting referrals from school guidance counselors and teachers, and also community partners. Now, this is really activist organizations, if we're going to be clear, but they point out less crazy sounding ones like Youth Services Bureau, YouthNet, whatever. But we can also expect that other activist organizations would take a referral. And so that begs the question, what's the point of a referral? That's what I thought when I saw this.
It begs a few questions, Melanie.
Yeah. Well, go on, Shannon.
Well, look, we know now that schools keep secrets from parents and that they are fighting tooth and nail to maintain the rights or the privilege or the protection for teachers to socially transition children, change their name, change their pronoun, allow them to change dress, do so in secret from parents at all ages. So we can get an activist teacher or a groomer, someone who's a real, positive on the whole trans ideology, saying, well, maybe it's because you're trans, and facilitating that transition in classrooms, and then referring that child to the gender clinic for a sex change without parental involvement.
Yeah, I just want to point out something here. I don't often talk about my own story or history, but I want to just say that I woke up to what was going on in terms of the trans movement because a young person in my life who ended up living with me for various reasons, who had difficulty with his family, came to me as a trans woman, as a trans girl. And I didn't think too deeply about this. I'm quite liberal. I thought, yeah, no worries. I can understand. I guess trans kids get kicked out of their homes. But as I got to know this young person, what I realized is, and this was a few years ago, what I realized is that they went to their school guidance counselor with this vision of being trans. That school guidance counselor then sent them to a doctor. That doctor then provided them with cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers at 16 years old without parent permission, without parent consent, without parent knowledge. That family was Catholic, so there was some difficulty, but then that child ended up in care at the advice of the school, and that child ended up at my house because of that. Now, when they came to me, they said, oh, my parents are abusive, they kicked me out. What I realized over time is that's not what's happened. There's been intervention from the school system and a dereliction of duty from the medical professionals. And I couldn't believe that. That's what really woke me up. I was like, this doesn't seem right. There's something really, really wrong here. And I ended up doing my own research. I ended up looking into this. It took me a long time to kind of really fully accept that this is really happening. And what I kept reading is that that's not the process. That's not what's going on. You have to have all these checks and balances. And so I got a little bit confused by that. I thought maybe this individual, this kid in my life, maybe they were a unique individual, maybe it was a unique circumstance. And when I saw this week, I realized it is now just completely acceptable to point out, but this is what's been going on. It's been what's going on for quite some time here in Ontario. And people really need to realize that teachers are kind of getting to a point where they really believe that they are somehow superior to parents. They know better than parents. They are the moral, righteous individuals in children's lives that should be guiding them in the world.
Are going to save them and protect them.
Save them and protect them. And yet that's not what's happening. We're not, this kid, I can say that they had difficulty with their family, sure, but when I got to know the family, I do not see that family as abusive at all. And I think the school has a lot to answer for. Schools have a lot to answer for in terms of breaking up relationships in families. It just broke my heart. And so in a way, I'm glad that this came out because it sort of proved to me that this is standard practice. So people really need to be aware. They really need to speak to their children, and they need to be vigilant about what's going on.
Absolutely. Now, I live in Ottawa, as I mentioned in our introduction today, and my child was referred to the gender clinic at CHEO. I don't know who made the referral. My child was going through counseling and had been referred to a endocrinologist and a psychiatrist, and was, prior to being prescribed cross-sex hormones as an adult at the age of 18, was put on to various drugs for mood disorder. And at the time, I mean, we're going back a number of years as my daughter was going through this, 2014, two things happened. One was the first trans inclusion diversity equity policy was brought into the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. The Catholic board, where my daughter was attending, it was a little bit behind, but the public boards were first on this. And this is about affirmation, and this is laid the groundwork for these secret social transitions. I've followed public relations and articles related to CHEO for quite some time now. And in 2014, that same year that policy was introduced in the public education system, there were between 8 and 12 children who had presented themselves to the gender diversity clinic at CHEO in a city of 1 million people. And I'm a math guy. I work in the money business, and I actually used to be a math teacher at the high school level for a private school. And everything in my world is about exponential growth. That's how investments and retirement savings are supposed to grow. So when I look at numbers of 8 to 12 in 2014, and we get reports from the head of the clinic in media saying that in 2021, it was expected to be 250. And then we actually got confirmed reports that the numbers, anyway, I took 3 or 4 data points that were given by CHEO itself. And my estimate, assuming CHEO has the capacity, was that in 2023, CHEO saw 500 children. And look, community partners, activist organizations, teachers at school in secret referring children to these sex change clinics. And we know
because let's remember that the policies in the school boards explicitly tell you that it is standard practice to not tell parents. Standard practice to not tell parents. So if it's standard practice to not tell parents, and then those schools are then referring the children, this is not only a social transition in secret, it is a medical transition in secret. That's important.
Yes. I don't know about you, but our involvement with Our Duty and with other parents, we've heard situations where parents learn about the appointment. They go to the gender clinic with their child, and then the child, in most cases, is prescribed cross-sex hormones or puberty blockers on the first visit.
First visit.
In most cases, there are no psychological evaluations, no psychiatric evaluations. There's no requirement for those sorts of things. And it's an automatic prescription.
Well, that's what the affirmative model is.
Right. And the claim is, well, these are reversible, and, it's better to do this than not because the child's going to kill themselves. Well, the data is actually telling us fairly clearly now that the suicide...
can't see it on this photograph. We can't see it on this photograph here, but actually the CHEO site does say at the bottom of the page that puberty blockers are reversible and perfectly safe. Now, this is a hospital. The hospital clearly is not following the recent data that's been coming out saying that, no, this is harmful. There are effects on the brain. There are all kinds of effects on the body. You cannot just pause puberty for a long period of time and expect that not to have some consequences on the bones. I mean, so many consequences have been shown because of these puberty blockers and because of the cross-sex hormones. And yet a hospital for children, transitioning children in secret from parents, is telling you it's perfectly safe. There's nothing wrong here. That's a problem.
All right, moving on. Our friend James Cantor. So back in the fall last year, I covered the Amy Ham hearings out in BC. I believe, well, this is a familiar image. I don't know if it was from that set of hearings, but he was testifying virtually for a number of different court cases. James Cantor worked at CAMH, and I believe that he was the head of the gender department of the Canadian Association of Mental Health in Toronto for quite some time. He was a successor to, I want to say it was Ken Zucker. And Cantor has been, I guess, sharing information or consulting to the government of New Brunswick about the issues that we've just been talking about with CHEO and the likes of secret social transition at school, and what the impacts of medical transition are to children. And he is in a bit of a tiff with Greta Bauer. Greta Bauer was one of the other expert witnesses who testified at the Amy Ham hearings last fall, and was presenting all kinds of evidence from the the trans activist side of things. Cantor gave a very good description of the hierarchy of quality of evidence, or the evidentiary pyramid. Surveys and qualitative types of we'll call it data gathering, probably the lowest type of research and in the pyramid, and the systematic review being the most comprehensive meta-analysis. His shots at Greta Bauer in the testimony were that she was using poor quality evidence. She was using circular referencing. So she published articles about her surveys and then cited her own surveys as proof of her conclusions. A lot like we hear about this idea of idea laundering. We're learning that academia, and perhaps this has been going on for a long time, is really, really corrupt with plagiarism, poor quality conclusions, activist-driven narratives, bad researchers citing bad researchers, and then, citing each other in order to give the appearance of quality of evidence.
I see that all the time now when I read the papers at Queer Papers. I'm really seeing that there's a very incestuous group of people that is constantly referencing each other, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I hope that James was able to convey what he did so very well in the Amy Ham hearings about that kind of evidence and the kind of activism in that's affecting our schools, and it's affecting when a hospital says these are fully reversible and proven, and it's secretly sex changing children behind their parents' backs. I hope that more rational, prudent minds prevail.
What's next, Shannon?
Exciting. So, Toronto, International Women's Day, March the 8th. The location is undisclosed. TrinityProductions.ca recently supported the tour of Christine Anderson. And the radical left in Canada has lambasted Christine Anderson, this is a little sidebar, as a far-right radical. And Christine and her party in Germany are crushing it in the polls and in public sentiment, because they have been pointing out for a long time that immigration and the sort of open gates of Germany have been causing problems. They need a rational and sensible immigration policy. She gets called a Nazi. Anyway, so my little rant there, Trinity Productions is supporting this event. They're not announcing the location until the day before for a paid attendees. We've got Kara Dansky, a lawyer from the United States. She is fantastic. Amy Ham's going to be there. April Hutchinson, Eva Kurlova from Calgary, Heather Mason, and Megan Murphy back to Toronto. I'm hoping to be there. It's on my list of things to do this week to register for the event and get a chance to reconnect with some friends, Eva and Heather, and speak with Amy, hopefully. I promise this to be a good one, and I think it's going to sell out. So if you haven't got your tickets yet, make it a priority, because it's coming up fast. And if you're in the Toronto region, or if you can travel there, we'll be bringing a contingent down from Ottawa, our usual turf crew and supporters like me. I've had the pleasure of standing with Heather Mason on International Women's Day before, and she is a courageous woman, and I look forward to seeing her again. while we're on the subject of events and save the dates on January the 27th, we'll have our playbill coming up this week. Announcement for our virtual summit, national summit, January 27th from 12 to 4 Eastern time, so that we can bring our West Coast friends in at 9 a.m. and our friends in the Maritimes and Newfoundland who are an hour and a half after us, and bring thinkers from across the country together. We have confirmed Professor David Millard Haskell from Waterloo. Nope, he's from Kitchener-Waterloo region, Wilfrid Laurier University. He was the thesis advisor for Lindsay Shepherd when she was getting attacked by trans activists a number of years ago. We will have the presentation of both the Trans Affirmation Toolkit, the activist document that we've been talking about for a little while, and a counterpoint developed in collaboration with GenSpect, with Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine, LGBT Courage Coalition, LGBT Alliance, Fair in Medicine, and Beyond Trans. We have the co-author of that document joining us. He's a retired lawyer. You would know him as @JustDad7 if you're a Twitter user. And so he's going to share we're going to share the activist document and the reverse mirror image, what actually should be the kinds of policies that we're implementing in school. And who else do we have? I'm working on getting a lawyer to talk about human rights issues and these weaponized claims of human rights.
Yeah, we definitely need to test the law on this. That's for
Indeed.
sure.
Yeah, and we're going to have a panel discussion. So this past week in Kitchener-Waterloo, they had an event on Monday night where they were talking about school alternatives. And when people cotton on to this idea that children are being secretly sexually transitioned or gender transitioned at school and then referred to clinics without parents knowing about it, this is dangerous to kids, right? And on top of that, we've got all the diversity, equity, and inclusion wokeness. There's violence increasing in schools and all kinds of problems. So they presented a super panel on school alternatives. We're going to have a couple other success stories from parents from across the country on our panel and a Q&A session. So January 27th, make sure you mark your calendars and remember the Reality-Based Women Unite on March the 8th in Toronto.
Shannon, so this is the Parents' Right Coalition of Canada, prcoc.ca. Where can people find a link perhaps to register?
We're going to have that up on Monday. Okay. I'm finalizing some of the details this afternoon. We will have a couple of unconfirmed speakers playing phone tag with a couple of people. So we're going to get our tentative playbill.
So if people go to the website, prcoc.ca, Parents' Rights Coalition of Canada, will they be able to find it there?
Yes,
maybe
we're going
to
confirm our registration links. We're vetting them and testing them as we speak. And it's on our list of things to do. So coming up, we got 2 weeks to go, and registration will be opening Monday, the 15th of January.
Lovely. Count me in.
Moving on. Count you in. You're going to be one of the presenters.
Can't wait.
All right. Speaking of schools, your pride, you are, I think that's
University of Regina.
Is it University of Regina?
Yeah. The University of Regina.
Okay, very good, very good. They're challenging Scot Moe's school policies, social transition.
We knew they would.
Heavily funded. They're supported by Egal Canada, which is the number, like, are they up to 10 million a year now? Like, it's millions of
Something
dollars.
Like that.
It's frustrating because everything that we're doing, this incredible document, hold it up for the camera there. The supporting gender questioning students in Canadian schools. One of the co-authors is a PhD researcher, very, very credentialed in science, quantitative kinds of scientific reporting. And there are pages and pages of citations and references in this document to quality studies. All of this effort is volunteer.
Yeah.
And both Just Dad 7 and the other co-author who can't be named, as well as a group of other people, hit the ground running on December the 19th when there was an announcement about 2 Canadian appointees to a panel of trans activists to the UN who are going to determine gender affirming policy, global policy for the United Nations. The consultation period was December the 19th to January the 8th, so incredibly short. And these volunteers got together, I understand, through people I know with SEGM, that's the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine. They were on Zoom calls 2 hours a day through the entire holiday period, with the exception of Christmas Day and Boxing Day. And they were able to get a really positive impact because the head of the women's equity at the United Nations also sent a letter to the powers that be about the negative impact of this project. So, there's lots of stuff happening in Canada, as we can see at the Saskatchewan level, at the level of EGAL, lots of money flowing, and there are tremendously committed, competent people, unfunded. We get the word marginalized all the time, really, in terms of public discourse and media and the governments in power, marginalized people who are rising consistently to the occasion to fight back against this, to protect our kids.
And yet, despite being entirely voluntary based, putting in their own efforts because these individuals are seeing there's a problem going on, despite that, still getting together and producing wins, I guess.
Yep.
So even in this story here, the reason that the UR Pride has commenced a constitutional challenge to Saskatchewan's mandating parental consent as a prerequisite to any social transitions under 16 years of age, blah, 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 blah. Well, that's only going on currently because it got lost. I think it's because of the notwithstanding clause was actually put in place. Wasn't that the case? But the long and the short of it is the awareness is being raised. Legal cases are coming forward. There's wins. We're getting attention in school boards. The public is becoming more and more aware. And the people pushing back against this are not funded. These are individuals going, hang on a second, this is not good. Mm-hmm. And so my prediction going forward is that as we raise more awareness, as we shine a light on these types of things that are going on, using their own documents, using their own ideas, then more people will rise up and say, hang on a minute, that's not okay. So I have a very positive view of the future on this.
I'm hopeful too. Let's move on to the next one, Melanie.
I don't know what to think about this one.
Well, I thought it was curious.
Yeah, it is very curious. And so Amrit Burring, who is part of the people pushing back in Abbotsford. So Abbotsford, British Columbia, have the parents there have been absolutely diligent. They've been protesting or speaking their displeasure out in front of school boards, out on the streets. There's been a campaign to get the Ministry of Education out because of some outrageous support for overly sexualized material, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so Abbotsford seems to be a hub for this currently and worth watching what's going on there. And I believe that Amrit Burring is a leader over there. Yep. And recently, this text put out this tweet, we won't allow any of these flags in any of our rallies anymore. Any bringer of these flags, be warned. Don't try your luck. We don't care if it has a progressive symbol or gays against groomers or grooming symbol in it. 80% is rainbow, the representative of SOGI 123 and tyranny abuse on our children. So what this does is it's conflating, and so this is kind of one of the concerns I've had for a while. When you mash together LGBTQIA+++++, when you mash all that together, you start to undermine the successes of the gay liberation movement, which brought society to a place where we accepted that there are people who are homosexual and that is fine. They're born that way. They can live their lives. They're normal individuals. They just want to fit into society. They even have gay marriage because they just want to be regular people.
Who cares? Right? We're all human beings. Love who you love. Who cares?
We got to that place in society.
Yep.
But what we're seeing now is that queer, which is in my opinion, is homophobic. It is about undermining all normativity. And to be homosexual is to be normative. You are having a normative relationship. And so even that needs to be undone. You need to be homogenderal. It's all about undermining all of the expectations, all about destroying the norms around society. It is an incredibly destructive political force. Queer is not a sexual identity. Queer is a political force designed and explicitly wanting to undermine stability in society. And so when you force team that with homosexuality, you give people who may already have a negative opinion of homosexuality an excuse to go back to vilifying it. And this is, in my opinion, this is what we're seeing in this text here. Yeah. And I think it's the LGBTQI, I would say the queers really here. I don't know if they know what they're doing, but it's like a lot of intersectional ideology. It's like you keep screaming victim, you keep screaming that these horrible things are happening, even though they're not. And eventually you create a situation where that oppression might happen because people get fed up with your cry bully attitudes. And so I'm not saying this is right. I'm not defending what this person has said. I'm saying, to me, this is a consequence of the undermining of the queer community, the parasitizing of homosexuality. I don't know. What do you think, Shannon?
Last fall, we reported that Eva Kurlova and Duchess L, who's a trans Indigenous woman from Alberta, who has had really significant complications from surgery and sought out MAID, and another person I hadn't known before. I think his name is Dan. Anyway, he's part of that group in Alberta who's pushing back against this. And this past week, Dan was reporting...
That's the Northern Alliance? Northern Light Alliance.
Is he?
They're part of that group, yeah.
Dan reported this week, and he was screenshotting the homophobic abuse that he's been getting. Because he's gay. So what? Yeah. But people who have been... kind of pushed to the margins in our society about, just polite conduct. Like, don't be a homophobe. Like, let people live their lives. It's none of your damn business. There's no reason to hate somebody because of who they love. And Dan has been posting a bunch of this stuff, and it's vile. It's really gross.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, the force teaming here. So what we're seeing, I want to point to the image here. We have a pride flag where the Gays Against Grooming symbol has replaced the Pride Progress chevron. We have seen Duchess Lois had created a cutout. I think she created some swag where you could wear a shirt, or you actually had a flag with the chevron cutout and that part of the flag in tatters to reclaim the Pride flag from the progress movement or from the queer activists. So what Gays Against Grooming here, Gays Against Grooming is the Canadian organization name. Gays Against Groomers is the American organization name. They both have the same objective, which is to reclaim the LGB from the queer movement. So it's sad to see that Amrit Burring, he is the head of a BC political party. I think it's called the Freedom Party or something like that. He ran and others ran it in the last election, and he is captaining the recall petition for Rachna Singh in Surrey. So for those not familiar with the geography of Vancouver, we have the city of Vancouver proper. Just south is Richmond. A little bit east is Surrey as we start to get into the Fraser Valley. We go a little bit farther east, we get to Abbotsford, and we get deep into the Fraser Valley, we get to Chilliwack. And it's been Surrey, Abbotsford, and Chilliwack where all these protests have been going on. And Rachna Singh's riding is in Surrey. The end of the recall campaign is January the 29th. So there's 2 weeks left in the recall campaign. They're aiming for 14,000 signatures. Maybe this week we'll reach out to, when I chat with Pierre Barnes, who I'm scheduled to chat with, find out what's going on and how successful that mobilization is to get the Education Minister of BC recalled for endorsing these age-inappropriate books. Up next, I
want to give a shout out to I don't know if he's a media creator, he's an artist. I'm sorry, Simon, if I don't have your job title perfectly correct, but it's Simon Esler, who makes documentary videos. He's put out some other documentary videos as far as I'm concerned. I haven't watched them yet, but he did put out this 15 or so minute video about the Million March for Children and linking that to some of the Marxist infiltration into Canadian schools.
He did a really good job.
He did a fantastic job. It's called Canada's Red Shadow. It's on his website. I think it's simonesler.ca or .com. But the long and the short of it is I wanted to give a shout out to Simon. I thought it was really interesting to point out also that it seemed to me that Simon wasn't necessarily connected into the individuals pushing back on this. He attended the Million Marches and did interview, I believe, Billboard Chris, but he's not really in those circles. And I don't think he has any specific preferential knowledge of any kind. And yet still managed to put together a very accurate video about the things that are going on in Canadian schools. So that gave me hope that an individual who is on the outside, that has no connection to these things, is able to assess quite accurately the situation in Canadian schools or around SOGI, around the gender topic in Canada, through publicly available information. Twitter especially, because there's a lot of stuff on Twitter. But it seems to me that people can piece this together on their own. So that made me quite happy that that was the case. So Simon, well done. Awesome video.
Yeah. Great job of tying together queer and the queer movement that we've been talking a lot about with Marxism and unions and the so-called workers movement. And it was chilling. And you'll see it when you watch the video. We'll put the link in our description so you can access it easily. When he was playing these chants of trans rights are workers' rights, which is the activist unions, and this is all scripted. A lot of it's funded, and a lot of it's tied to the universities and the diversity, equity, inclusion kind of movement. And it really is the Marxist and socialist movement that we're seeing proliferate under the nice sounding term of equity is an extremely destructive force in our country right now.
Just a side note, I actually spoke to a teacher last night who originally is from Alberta, but actually works in China right now. And he is an ex-Marxist who defected and decided that when he realized how destructive this teaching was, and we had a long conversation about why he defected from Marxist ideology, what he thinks about teaching in Canada compared to teaching in China. Anyway, I won't go into a lot of detail, but very, very interesting because that's another person who's very far left who went, oh my God, there's something really, really wrong here. And if we don't stop it, this is going to absolutely destroy society. Anyway, that was just a side note that I wanted to point out here. I'm going to suggest that we take a short break and we will be right back. We're going to take a little detour from gender. Normally, we try to focus on gender, but we're going to try something a little bit different today because to me, there was an event that seemed to be pretty significant, and that is David Menzies, the journalist from Rebel News, was arrested by police for assaulting Chrystia Freeland when he asked her a question. Now, this video went viral. I think right now it's at 14 million views, so many people have already seen it, but if you haven't seen it, let's play that clip.
Ms. Freeland, how come the IRGC is not a terrorist group? Why is your government supporting Islamo-Nazis? What? Excuse me. What are you doing?
You're under arrest for assault. Why are you pushing me? You're under arrest for assault.
Who are you?
You're under arrest for assault.
Police, you're under arrest for assault. How am I under arrest? You bumped into me.
You pushed into me.
I was just scrubbing. I got my credentials here and you just bumped into me. So excuse
Police,
me.
You're under arrest.
What is your name and your badge? What is your name and your badge?
You've been told you're under arrest.
Why am I under arrest? Come on over here. We've got a couple of He blocked my way. What? I was just scrumming Chrystia Freeland.
I'm a police officer. You're under arrest.
What is your name and your badge number?
Assaulting a police officer.
How is that possible?
Okay, because
you assaulted me 3 years ago when blackface was happening.
That was very aggressive. What was happening?
I just want to pause it a second just to point out for those who are viewing it for the first time, this police officer did actually interject himself into the situation before announcing that he was a police officer and started accosting David Menzies before announcing himself in that way. And so he could have been anybody. I mean, it's unlikely, but he could have been anybody. That I thought that was an interesting point to make here.
You mean I was asking questions aggressively?
No, your actions were. You were almost pushing everybody over.
Lincoln, you got this on video, right? He's saying I'm pushing people over.
Yeah,
That's an absolute falsehood.
There were feet were shuffling.
So now it appeared that way. That's what you're saying, officer. It appeared I was pushing people. I didn't touch a single person.
That was a little bit aggressive for what was happening. Get that. You're under arrest. Please take the microphone out of my face.
Well, I'd like an ongoing record of this.
I think I'm going to stop this here. I mean, you can go watch this video. It's Rebel News are all over this story. So, I mean, there's lots and lots of clips that you can view. But the important point here is that David Menzies was doing what journalists commonly have done in my lifetime in the past, is to ask politicians questions on the street. This is not an uncommon thing to do. Whether or not you agree with that tactic, it's really not particularly uncommon. Then he was accosted by a person who could have been anybody, accusing David Menzies of assaulting him whilst assaulting David Menzies. Later we find out it's a police officer, and all the police officers are taking away. And ended up, it was an RCMP officer, and then the York Region District, the York Police, I'm getting confused with the school board, the York Police took away David Menzies, and he was actually released pretty soon afterwards. So the York Region Police didn't actually pursue the matter in any way really after that. So I think that's quite telling.
Indeed.
Yeah. So this happened. And when I saw this week, my reaction was, I no longer get hugely upset by a lot of the things that go on these days. I kind of think, okay, well, that's par for the course. But this actually really upset me, because we're supposed to live in a free, liberal democracy where freedom of the press is an important pillar of a free, liberal democracy. In fact, I saw a video after this where Chrystia Freeland was defending the press, saying the press are not the enemy of the people. The press are very important, and sometimes they ask uncomfortable questions, and we need to support that. As far as I'm aware, Chrystia Freeland is also an ex-journalist and understands that principle. So for this to happen, to me, was a very, very strong indication that we don't actually have freedom of the press. And often people talk about view censorship. So you're allowed to have a story, you're allowed to have opinion if it's the right opinion. And to me, that was very much expressed in this situation this week. Do you have any thoughts, Shannon?
Well, I'm going to go back to my grade 12 law class on the definition of assault. And it differs province by province, but assault is unwanted contact. So if somebody pushes you or puts their hands on you, then that can be deemed assault. It can also, in certain cases, be deemed as consent in terms of initiating violence. It gives people the permission to protect themselves. And what I saw was that individual, the police officer, put his arm out, had stepped in front of David Menzies, put his arm out in close proximity to him, and then claimed that he was the one being assaulted. This looks like a foul on a basketball court. I'm the worst person to give sports analogies, but this looks like somebody stepped in and fouled Menzies in his attempt to engage Chrystia Freeland in it. Give me some answers. Menzies' approach is very paparazzi. He is confrontational. There was a lot of rhetoric this week about, well, you can't call him a journalist. He's not a journalist. And this is all about, grifting for their fundraising and things like that. It seemed quite apparent that, as you observed, the person didn't identify themselves as a police officer, and that they stepped in front of Menzies without identifying themselves, and then said, you're under arrest for assaulting a police officer. So I believe there was no charges laid. He was released, but this was an intimidation tactic by the bodyguards around Chrystia Freeland to send a message to Menzies. Now,
yeah. So Chrystia Freeland, like I said, is an ex-journalist. And so she understands the freedom of the press scenario and so on and so forth. And as a politician, you would think, as an ex-journalist and a politician, that she would feel uncomfortable with a situation like this where her RCMP guards have behaved in this way. And so I was really looking forward to hearing Freeland's response to the situation. And then when it did happen, let me just play the clip of her response.
What do you make of your security detail arresting David Menzies?
So I want to start with what was important about Monday. And what was important about Monday, January 8th, was that was the 4th anniversary of a date that I think forever needs to be marked and circled in black on the calendar of all Canadians. It was a tragedy for Canada. Canadians were criminally murdered. And I want to say to the families and loved ones of the people who were murdered that Canada remembers, Canada will not forget. And that's why I was in Richmond Hill. Marcy was there too, to show that this is a Canadian tragedy, that Canada remembers and Canada will not forget. On the incident, as you guys know very well, Canada is a rule of law country. Canada is a democracy. Operational decisions about law enforcement are taken by the police of jurisdiction. Quite appropriately, political elected officials have no role in the taking of those decisions, and that's why I don't have any further comment.
So our Deputy Prime Minister spent a whole lot of time not talking about the question, but talking about something entirely different, and then spent a few seconds saying,
throwing the police under the bus. Yeah.
It's nothing to do with me. I don't make those decisions. They make those decisions. Now, a leader or deputy leader of a country is accountable for what goes on in that country. They are the figureheads that are supposed to support that those liberal democratic values. And what I heard here is Chrystia Freeland is not defending the freedom of the press. You know, at any point, she could have said, look, we made a mistake and maybe it was a bit heavy-handed and maybe we'll review this in any way, shape or form. If that's the case, she could have taken that responsibility, or even in the moment could have, there's just so many ways she could have addressed this, but the passing on the buck in that way really made me concerned. This is telling me that this is an individual that does not respect the rules of a liberal democracy in this case. And a lot of that, so before this comment was made by Freeland, the press were all over the place, as you can imagine. You had people both defending the situation with Rebel News. It got a lot of attention internationally for Canada being a Canuckistan, whatever you want to call it. Look at the joke of Canada, so on and so forth. But you also had in Canada, which didn't get much international attention, is our elite media class, our elite journalist class, doing what we expected them to do, which was to parrot the idea that David Menzies is not a journalist. He's not really a journalist, because we have real journalists in Canada and we have fake journalists. And this fake journalist really did need to be arrested, because fake journalists are not allowed to do that. Ignoring the fact that a citizen, so if I went up to Chrystia Freeland, I'm allowed to ask a question. She's a deputy prime minister of this country. I'm allowed as a citizen, whether I'm a journalist or not. So that alone doesn't make any sense. But beyond that, as far as I'm aware, there is no journalism accreditation board in Canada. There's no Ministry of Propaganda here. So a journalist is a self-determined title. Now, there are standards, and I can't remember the name of the organization, the Canadian Journalism something, who will point out that these are journalistic standards, and we try to hold our journalists to account to these standards. But no one gets to say who is and who isn't a journalist, and there's many reasons for that. And if you don't mind, I'm actually going to play just another little clip before we discuss further.
Well, that's a very good question, and thank you for it. I don't think it is for any government to define who is a journalist, actually. I would leave it to journalists to define that themselves. I think our role is to make sure that, as we said today, we have seen there's a number of trends against media freedom around the world. We heard from our colleagues in Belarus today who have been harassed, who have been facing violence, and have been seeing more and more restrictions on media freedom. One other aspect which is of concern to me, and I mentioned that before, it's the kind of emerging technologies which are spreading misinformation and disinformation. So I would think that we need more than ever journalists around the world to speak up, to stand up, and to report information accurately so that citizens around the world can be properly informed. And that's the bedrock of our democracy.
Right. So to me, there's a lot of contradiction here. So this Liberal minister points out, journalists are self-determined. I mean, there's a lot of pushback now because we have social media. You and I could be, I guess, considered journalists in some respects, even though we're definitely not. But the idea is that, but anyone can be a journalist. And commentators, right? Yeah. But in the past, a journalist could really only do that through mediums like the newspapers or the news, television news and stuff like that. And so that was a bit more controlled. And now there's a lot more democracy around journalism. And so there's a lot of anxiety within the journalist class as to who is and who isn't a journalist. And maybe that's something that needs to be debated and discussed, but there's also a lot of talk around disinformation, misinformation. But we see within the media in Canada is highly, highly controlled by their source of funding, which is the government. And so there's a definite incentive for mainstream media, legacy media, whatever you want to call them, to paint alternative media as they're disinformation. They are misinformation. Don't listen to them. They're not real journalists. We are the elite here. You must listen to us. We have the correct opinions. And that, I think, is something that really needs to grab people's attention. You need to pay attention to this because if nothing else, look, I don't always like what Rebel News do. I'm not saying that I support Rebel News necessarily as some pillar of journalism or anything like that. I'm kind of agnostic on Rebel News. It's the principle here. So what this is kind of telling you, in my opinion, is we have an elite class of information peddlers, in my opinion, that are telling you what you need to believe. They're not allowing individuals to listen to who they want to listen to. Now, it could be that some information is better than others, but in a liberal democracy, the idea is that you have the choice, you have the right to have your beliefs. So I don't know. There's just so much in this story that I'm definitely really, forgetting some huge points.
It's really huge. And I'm going to go to, like, to know him is to love him, Noam Chomsky. I started reading Noam Chomsky in the early 90s. For those viewers who aren't familiar, Noam is in his 90s now. He's retired from, he was at MIT, if I remember, Nobel Prize winner in linguistics. But he was a socialist, geopolitical critic of policy, media, and government. Very, very well known. And as I got to know Noam Chomsky, one of his central criticisms of media was that it was controlled by advertisers and, to some extent, military geopolitical interests. So there was a accepted narrative. And some stories got reported and more attention. Some wars got reported with lots of attention. Others didn't. I think he makes a lot of valid points. I don't agree with him on everything, particularly, now that we're seeing this rise in sort of neo-Marxism and communist influence and how negative the impact is. I have less time for that general philosophy. But what we have now is a change of masters, especially in Canada, where, it's no longer so much the advertisers that are having influence on what stories are getting, and direct economic interest. It is government interest. The old expression, don't bite the hand that feeds you, right? So if the Liberal government is keeping the lights on at CBC and at Globe and at CTV, those editors are not going to, well, they're going to be gentler. There's just no other way around it. It's compromising journalistic integrity to have this much money flowing to these legacy media organizations from the taxpayers, funded by government from a political position. The other thing I would say, about journalism in general, there's different types of journalism. There is the idea of journalism where you are outside the story. Okay, and I've heard this, reporters talk about this in war zones, where people are dying in front of you and need to be rescued, but your job is to convey the story and maintain impartiality. So you let the scene unfold as it is and you report it as it is. Then there's a type of journalism, some of you may know it, called gonzo journalism. This is the opposite side of that. Gonzo journalism was pioneered, I don't know where the term was coined from, but Hunter S. Thompson, who was a writer, political commentator, and the idea of gonzo journalism is that you become part of the story. You embed yourself in the Hells Angels, as he did in the 60s, to report about what that environment is like. And in anthropology, this is distinction is emic and etic. Emic is when you're part of the culture. Etic is when you're outside of it and you're reporting on it. Now, David Menzies falls somewhere in between. He became the story this week because of this. And I ask myself, what is the responsibility of journalism? And part of the responsibility of media and journalism is to hold the government and the institutions of power to account and to be able to communicate and convey that to viewers and consumers of that information. And I really believe that Menzies did his job this week extremely well by becoming part of the story unintentionally. It exposed a type of contempt for a certain a type of approach in media, and it exposed to the world a heavy-handed, authoritarian, intimidating control of message and narrative. Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate here about David Menzies, because we've talked about him before, specific to the gender issue. Last year, or perhaps it was late in 2022, David Menzies was assaulted in the GTA when he crashed a professional development day for teachers. And at that event, or at that, I guess it was a hotel conference room of some sort, Kayla Lemieux, the busty shop teacher from Halton, was attending professional development in full getup. And so Menzies was trying to confront Kayla Lemieux in a private event. I'm not a lawyer, but he was trespassing. He was pushing himself into an environment he was not invited to. It was a workplace event for teachers, and he was escorted out the door rather roughly.
But as you point out, that's a private location. That's not what we're talking about here.
No, we're not.
Asshole.
We're not. But continuing the devil's advocacy here, Menzies also has put himself recently in a couple of situations at swim meets, poolside, where he has been confronted by security and management and told he has to leave, that he's not allowed to film. He's been threatened with having the police called. In the case of the Kayla Lemieux and the professional development training, he had the police called on him. There was video of him and his cameraman, if I recall, in his car, and the police are, having a conversation with him about his behavior. So, Menzies is pushing the boundaries. Like, he was acting like a paparazzi who's trying to get the big, that $1 million shot of the celebrity and crossing the line. Whether he did or he didn't, we could debate. But he was in his attempt to get the story, being more aggressive than a normal reporter would be at say, a press conference. He was, and good for him for pushing those boundaries. It's part of the way that he's getting the story, and part of his
Yeah, I'm going to push back on your devil's advocacy.
Good.
I mean, yes, you definitely have a point there. But like I said, I'm old enough to remember, all over the Western world, it was not uncommon for a group of journalists, maybe dozens of journalists, to accost, or I think it's called scrumming. I learned that this week. Public figures on the street to get comments. I mean, how many videos do you have of lawyers being scrummed because of a popular case or some kind of case getting big attention in America or even Canada? This is not an uncommon thing to do. Yet you see it less and less. And when you do see it in this case, it's obviously being treated like, oh, this never happened before. It's against decorum. He's wrong for doing it. Maybe that's a conversation that needs to be had. But slowly over time, this has been less and less and less common. But we're not talking about that. And now other journalists are saying, oh, this is an absolutely terrible thing to do. He should have never done it. He's not a real journalist. Even though that politician that I just played a clip from, even in there is contradictory. They're saying, well, a journalist is self-determined and we need more journalists, yet the rest of our Liberal Party is silencing journalists and saying some are and some are not journalists. Now, these are the same people that talk about my truth. There is not the truth. There is my truth. My truth is just as valid as your truth. This is super common within the, elite class of journalists nowadays who think they're the real journalists and not those fake journalists. And yet, when someone is doing something that they disagree with or they believe is not part of their group, all of a sudden it's misinformation and it's not real journalism. Now, people really need to see the contradiction in that messaging. And I'm just hoping that events like this, and I'm glad it went global, and I hope there's a lot of attention paid to it, because specifically in this case, okay, we can talk about private events. Sure, you're right. There's some gray area there, and maybe he did act unethically. That's a potential issue there for sure. But he wasn't. He was out in a public place. He asked questions of a politician who should expect that as part of her job as deputy PM of the country, right? Outside in a public place. And this lady used to be a journalist herself who would understand that this is common practice. What this was, in my opinion, was coordinated. It was, she knew exactly what she was doing. She knew that her bodyguards would do that. This is my opinion. I'm speculating. And then when questioned about it, went, it's nothing to do with me, guys. Sorry, you're going to have to ask them. Now, as far as I understand, that RCMP officer is, there's a review going on right now, so I don't know what's going to happen with him. He did give me Benito Mussolini vibes when I saw him. So we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah, there's the old expression, right? Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, from Freudian philosophy, right? Where maybe this police officer, and there are police officers who get into the force. I just listened to a great podcast about this yesterday, or a TED Talk of some sort. People get into positions where they have power over other people because they're the kinds of people who like to accumulate power to exercise their authority. Some professions attract bullies and sociopaths and people who will rough people up.
Let me tell you why that's completely irrelevant. Because Freeland...
Like my thought is, this: what if this guy's just a jerk?
Well, it doesn't matter. That really doesn't matter, because Freeland at any point could have turned around and said, I'm sorry, could you please let him go? That is inappropriate. Please don't do that. At any point. But she turned around, smirked, walked off, and then dismissed all responsibility. Now, the person who had the most responsibility in this case was Chrystia Freeland as PM of, Deputy PM of the country. So to me, that argument is completely irrelevant. Another argument that I heard, or that I kept reading online, is that, well, she's a woman and she's being accosted by this tall man in public. And I would feel uncomfortable as a woman if a man came up to me and asked me questions like that. It's threatening. Well, I'm a woman, and I can tell you that if I take on a job that has an expectation of accountability to the public, and I know, especially as my history as a journalist, that journalists are going to ask me questions on the street. Now, he wasn't threatening. People know Menzies. He's a very recognizable person. They know that he's not going to actually assault anyone. What they mean by that is, please leave me alone. I don't want to answer your questions. But getting back to the point of being a woman, if you are uncomfortable with being asked questions by journalists in public, perhaps that job is not for you. If you are too fragile to handle that situation with a whole lot of police officers and bodyguards, if you are too fragile for that, then that's not the job. You should not be deputy PM. So for the feminists out there, for the woke feminists out there defending the fact she's a woman, it should have never happened.
Okay.
This is a complete dereliction of personal responsibility.
I have 2 points. One is that another deputy leader of the Conservative Party, in the recent past, had Menzies punted from an event by the police for specifically saying, I felt unsafe. Okay, so that's the first of my points. The second is that
Isn't she also the deputy PM? That's Melissa Lantsman. Isn't she also the deputy Conservative?
Deputy Conservative leader, yeah.
Yep.
And the second point there is that the Conservatives, and I find myself standing on the Conservative side of the political spectrum as it is today. I have long been a Liberal. And I don't believe I've changed my viewpoint on the world, but the political environment has changed dramatically. So, I have always said that, if I voted for Trudeau in 2015 and following, and I've always said, you know what, if he goes off the rails, I will criticize him just as hard as I criticized Stephen Harper. So I'm going to criticize the Conservatives on this right now, because
please do.
Pierre Poilievre
criticize just as much.
Pierre Poilievre made hay out of this, and pushing that it's the Liberals trying to silence the media and stop stories from getting out, and use intimidation tactics or whatever other narrative that the Conservatives used to try and attack the Liberals. And that's their prerogative to attack. They're the opposition. Their job is to hold the government in power to account. But it really stank of hypocrisy here.
Calling the kettle black.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Indeed.
This is what I saw, because I didn't know that. When I saw Melissa Lantsman basically having Menzies in a public place, also arrested for assault when he was not assaulting her, because she did not like the questions that he was asking. She felt unsafe. Oh my God, I'm so unsafe because he's asking me questions I don't want to hear. Oh my God, I'm such a fragile little woman. That bothered me too, and then watching Poilievre actually say, oh yeah, this is terrible that this is happening. Oh my God, freedom of the press. Yeah, no, kettle black. This is not okay. It doesn't matter if it's coming from the Liberals. It doesn't matter if it's coming from the Conservatives. I just hope, so I'm very agnostic. I don't know how I feel about the Conservatives. I'm not a huge fan, personally, not a huge fan of any of the politicians out there right now. But I think that it's important to just pay attention to what's going on, because it's really, really easy to criticize the deplorables, the people you don't like. Okay. Oh, well, he's kind of a gonzo journalist, like you say. Yeah. There was some talk about Menzies setting up this situation. Oh, that's another point. If Menzies, okay, yes, they have a GoFundMe, but if let me just point out, if it was their plan to get themselves arrested and then so they could sue the government, do you not think that the government then, or Freeland, is incredibly stupid to fall into such an obvious trap given Menzies' history? So for all you Liberals out there, all you Liberal defenders, all that's saying, if you believe this idea, is that your deputy prime minister is a bit of an idiot, a fragile one at that. But it doesn't matter if that happened to Chrystia Freeland or to Melissa Lantsman. The point is that it happened. And it's so easy to attack the easy target, right? It's so easy to say, well, he's kind of an annoying guy. We don't like him. He deserved it. He's not a real journalist. That's really easy to do. Yeah. But what you are forgetting when you do that is that if you set that kind of precedent, eventually, when you have an opinion that is unpopular, you are the one who's going to be silenced. You're the one who's going to suffer those consequences. And I really want people to think about that, is that when you don't defend the people you disagree with, eventually that gets turned around onto you. And so this is the particular reason why I had such an issue with this week, is the very short-sightedness of people going, when someone I disagree with is having this bad thing happen to them, yay, not thinking about that, that's going to come right back onto you if we allow that to happen. So I think it's really important that we need to stand up for journalists to do their jobs and to do it freely. That's my point. That's what I wanted to share this week.
I think Menzies did it. He did his job. And he has a shtick, and he has a whole way of doing things. It's abrasive. It pushes boundaries. He pushes up against situations where, he is asserting that he has a right to be in places at a scrum, at a media event, for example. And that the fact that the response that he's getting, what's that term we get from Marxism? Your reaction,
struggle session.
Your reaction is their action or action.
Yeah, your reaction is the ultimate action. So right. Your action, the enemy's reaction is your ultimate action.
Yeah.
Right.
So Menzies, as a provocateur, and I'm going to close up on this, as a provocateur is playing a specific role. And the role of a provocateur, if we go back a little bit in history, we might connect this to the court jester or the court fool. If you've read Shakespearean plays, in every play there is a fool that is the only person within the environment that can speak the truth to power without getting their head cut off. Okay, it's the job of the fool to expose the stupidity, the excesses, the abuse of power, all of the negative characteristics of the people in power. And Menzies did his job. His approach is it's a kind of a sacred role to play this fool. And you do look like an idiot sometimes. Another great example of someone who's playing this archetype or this pattern in Canada and around the world is Billboard Chris. He is a provocateur. He's standing on a street corner. The reaction that people are giving him is the story. And that's what David Menzies is doing.
Well, that was super fun, Shannon. I really enjoyed taking a bit of a side road out of gender and talk about something a little bit different this week.
It was an important story.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for watching to the end of this video. If you haven't liked and subscribed, consider liking and subscribing for more content just like this.
If you got comments, make sure you leave them below, and we'd love to hear from you. I think we're going to take a few more opportunities in the coming weeks and months to step just a little outside the niche of gender to talk about some Canadian cultural issues having to do with wokeness and DEI. And we hope that you enjoy it. We'd love to get your feedback.
Thanks for watching to the end. Please consider liking and subscribing so we can bring you more content like this. And here's a couple suggestions you might like.